What's up, guys? Brady here, coming at you with the discography ranking for Poison the Well in preparation for their upcoming album, Peace in Place, set to drop this Friday. You know, I'm sure a lot of modern metalcore fans don't probably even know who Poison the Well are, but they are literally one of the most important bands in that style. You might even be able to classify them as like the first metalcore band ever, or at least the first big, relatively big name metalcore band ever. And it's just in the way that they took that 90s style metallic hardcore that the likes of, Converge and Hatebreed pioneered, and they just incorporate a lot more melody alongside it to where things like that clean vocal chorus, harsh vocal verse are established. I know a lot of people would say that those bands, Converge and Hatebreed, etc., are like the founding metalcore bands. I disagree. I think they're just kind of metallic hardcore. This, to me, is where metalcore starts. And then after they established themselves with those first three very genre-pushing albums, they decided to just go for more of like a post-hardcore route, which stay tuned to see which one of those sounds I like better. But we, of course, have to start things off with the bottom spot on here, my number 5 pick. Sure to be controversial. It's the opposite of December, Season of Separation. I know that's probably going to shock a lot of people because I know this album is so beloved. And listen, if you were a fan at the time, I could totally understand why. This was just such a different album at the time. And I don't think it's bad. It's just, it sounds a little bit unrefined to me, a little bit awkward in its transitions. And at the same time, I do recognize and appreciate at times just the rawness of the album and just the fact that this album is pretty brave, especially at the time, given that they were kind of creating their own sound in a way, and they weren't really adapting to a lot of those rigid genre rules like I think a lot of bands were doing at the time. And the overall heavy melodic dynamic on here is used very effectively. A Wish for Wings That Work is, for one, a fun title, but also a track that pulls it off pretty well, because it starts off with that pretty cool double bass groove, and then later in the song you get a lot of really dissonant riffing, but then you have that quiet spoken word type part in the middle. I think that is done very well. Definitely one of the most well executed songs just on this album. Midair Love Message too, that's another one where it kind of when it gets quiet in that song, it comes off a lot more doomy. Slice Paper Wrists, Artist Rendering of Me, also songs that pull it off pretty well. They do pull it off well at some points on here, but I think the biggest flaw that I see is just an overall feeling of the record being unrefined. The best instance of this being some spotty clean vocals at times. I know the song Nerdy is the band's most well-known song to date, but the clean vocals on that song do not sound good. They sound very audibly off-key. I'm sure the band probably wouldn't even deny that at this point. And don't get me wrong, I'll elaborate. The vocals very drastically end up improving after this record, but on this record, they're very spotty. To Mandate Heaven, it's kind of a similar thing. It has some cool grooves in it, but then just the clean vocals come in and they don't sound good. If my opinion is different from the majority on this record, I'm just going to attribute that to the fact that I'm a much newer fan than probably many of this band's hardcore fans are. So I'm sure many of you have some kind of nostalgic connection with this album. But purely on a fundamental level, I think if you take away that nostalgia and listen to it purely on a surface fundamental level, you'll agree with me. This is not a bad album, but it's their weakest. Top 3 tracks I'll give to Midair Love Message, A Wish for Wings That Work, and Slice Paper Wrists. Next up, at the number 4 spot, I'm going to give to their 4th record, Versions. This is a record that, to me, sees the band pretty much fully embrace and fully become a straight-up post-hardcore band. And this is a record that I do overall enjoy. I don't have nearly as much negative to say about this one as I do about Opposite of December. The production on this record is interesting because, again, it's a little bit more raw, but in this case, I feel like that was done deliberately to fit more of that post-hardcore type sound. This record, it just sounds less metaled up in favor of fitting the overall atmosphere of the twangier parts on here, and this just being a more melodic record overall. So I think it actually works on this record. And, the style on this record, too. It is under, an obvious post-hardcore type of umbrella, but there's still a good amount of versatility on here, just in the way these songs sound. Nagaina, I don't know how to say it, Nagaina, however you say it, is a song that has this bluesy swing to it. It's a fun song overall. And then Slow Good Morning brings this really sludgy, murky, almost grunge type of vibe that I also really enjoy. Also, You Will Not Be Welcomed is a quieter track on here for sure, but it has a very like entrancing and rich atmosphere to it, despite the fact that like there isn't a whole lot of added production to it. That's something that I can appreciate as someone who reviews lots of modern metalcore bands where the atmosphere is pretty much fully synthetic. And other tracks on here, like Letter Thing and Breathings for the Birds in the beginning of the album, like they have a much more consistent energy throughout, and there's less of like those up and down dynamics, which normally is something I like, but I think on that first record it just became a little formulaic, but on this record they don't really adapt to that criticism. I think the only reason this album is on the number 4 spot for me is just because despite all the songs having some identity, there's still a little filler on here, and the record also just kind of is less of a dynamic one. It's very much a singular record, not in necessarily a bad way, but it just makes it a little less dynamic than the top 3 records I'm about to talk about. Top 3 tracks, Slow Good Morning, You Will Not Be Welcome, and The Notches That Create Your Headboard, another cool title. Next up is The Tropic Rot, the band's most recent album. Probably a predictable pick after you just heard what number 4 was. And another record that overall like is pretty much a full-on post-hardcore record. But I do like this one better because kind of like I praised the last record for a little bit, this one really does like prioritize atmosphere and emotion a little bit more than the previous one did. I think Versions was them tiptoeing, and then this record was them fully embracing it. But I think what gives this record the edge is that there's still tracks that are more dynamic on here, because they bring back some of the heaviness at times. Like the track Cinema is a great instance of that. It starts off and it's pretty much full-on hardcore, forget the post. It's just a really aggressive song that does end up getting more melodic. So at the same time, they're also kind of bringing back elements of their early material with that. And I like the production better on this record. This, I think, is a really good balance between that slightly more raw production of Versions and still sounding very crisp and clean and maybe slightly polished in a good way. Exist Underground is a great opener. It's got a lot of energy to it, and it just balances things out really well. Despite the fact that it does have the heavy and the melodic part, it still feels consistent. Antarctica in Me, which I'm not sure if they misspelled Antarctica wrong on purpose or not. I'm assuming they did, but that song I actually really enjoyed. That probably is the song most so on here that pushes the atmosphere. And overall, that very like empty, like barren feeling that this record gives me, I think is probably best sent home compared to other records that have also went for that. But I think this record does it best. When I think of like post-hardcore bands that I love, like Thrice or Vacant Home or Touche Amore, like I could see them taking influence from a sound like this and an overall style like this. And that shows that even on their last album, when they had switched styles, they were still being influential. I really do believe that. Top 3 tracks, When You Lose, I Lose as well, Antarctica, and Exist Underground. Next up at number 2 is the band's second album, Tear from the Red. What an improvement from the debut Opposite December. This record pretty much steps up everything. Most notably, most obviously, the clean vocals are way, way better on this record. Look no further than Horns and Tails for probably the best instance of that. The songs are more refined, a lot less formulaic, and this is when I really hear the influence from Poison the Well seep into what ended up becoming shortly after the metalcore explosion. The opener Botchla on here is great. It's just the dissonant riffing, and those melodic parts on here are awesome. Lazaro is a track that really brings in the heaviness, and it brings in also a lot of odd time qualities, which I like. Songs like Rings from Corona and Turn Down Elliot, which random names, are songs that I think pull off something that the first record didn't really do, which was just have songs that are consistently just heavy, just all the way through without the melodic breaks. Much like I've discussed so far for every album, there is still a little filler on here, like Pieces of You and Me has like, it starts off pretty cool. It's got like almost a pop punk influence at times, but the rest of the song kind of just doesn't do a whole lot different. You got Carsey Street, the spoken word interlude, that really does nothing for me. So the album still has some shortcomings, but overall, like it's a pretty good album. Top 3 tracks, Horns and Tails, the ballad, great song, Parks and What You Meant to Me, and Lazaro. And at my number 1, You Come Before You, the band's third album. It was their major label debut, and you do hear that because this is a much better sounding record overall. The production did improve on the last record, Tear from the Red, but it was much more of a noticeable step up with this one. Everything just really pops out at you more. And whereas on Tear from the Red, the clean vocals drastically improved, for this record, the screams to me sound way better. I liked how they sounded on the first 2 records, but there was, again, a really noticeable step up here. And I think the band just really mastered their sound on this record. Like, again, it's not a perfect record. It still has a little filler on it to me, but they sound a lot more confident with this record than they did on the first 2. And I think I'm right, because they ended up experimenting more with their next 2 records. It's almost like this record was the band saying, okay, we've gained mastery of this style, now we have to do something different, switch things up. This album just sounds so focused, so inspired, and they really do feel like they fully refined that style that they pioneered. The opener, Ghost Chant, is a great instance of them just showing that they are a metalcore band, at least on this record. Loved Ones is a track that has some really cool melodies and a lot of emotion to it. Lyrically, I found it very interesting. It's almost like he's lashing out at a parent. Four Bandaged Iris really brings the dissonance and the grooves at the same time, which can be a hard balance to strike. You have The View from Here's a Brick Wall, which pretty much is like 2 songs that sound like sandwiched together perfectly. It's got the heaviness, it's got that slate progginess with the off-time ideas, and again, you got like those almost kind of barren desert-like twangy melodies, which I really like on this track. Songs like Pleasant Bullet and Crystal Lake just sound so chaotic and frantic, and that brings to mind more of like those metallic hardcore influences like a band like Converge would have done. And Sounds Like the End of the World is probably my favorite song this band's ever put out. I love that dark, just moody, eerie atmosphere to it. It's such a sinister track. And it's an easy highlight for me in their catalog. There's a lot of great tracks on here, and this is probably the one record that I would say is like truly like a really fucking great record. They sound confident, the music speaks for itself. To me, it is their best. Top 3 tracks: Sounds Like the End of the World, A View from Here is a Brick Wall, and Loved One. And yeah, that about does it for this Discography ranking. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned and hit the subscribe button to see my review of Peace in Place shortly after it drops on Friday. Of course, stay tuned for more rock and metal-related content. Comment below what are your thoughts on their discography and how you would rank their albums. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace.